Welcome to Real Vision. My name is Santiago Velez, and I'm the co-founder and division lead for research and development at Block Digital. I'm very excited today to introduce Catherine Coley, the CEO of Binance US. Hello, welcome.
So excited to be here.
Wow. Well, this is a real treat, I think, for our viewers and people that have been following your career. So thank you very much for joining us. Today, I'd like to take this opportunity and learn a little bit about yourself, your past, but also a lot about what you're doing at Binance and also kind of your views on the industry as a whole. But first of all, just let us know a little bit about yourself.
Happy to. Not many people get to say they got into crypto having started their career out as a child in Disney World, but I grew up in Orlando, Florida, and thought I'm never going to make it in this world. So always had a high risk tolerance for seeking something that was the new frontier. And I understood that if I put myself in situations most people would be afraid of going into or think it was uncommon for me to navigate, I might have a higher reward in that experience. So I threw myself out of college into foreign exchange in Hong Kong and Morgan Stanley, which to me was kind of the absolute opposite of the world I grew up in. It was, the Wild West, so we thought, and we thought it would be kind of the last chapter of capital markets and what was in kind of that kind of gruff and exciting world that was the macro environment in the late 2010s. So I thoroughly enjoyed gathering my understanding in the macro space with the FX world. And that really is what led me to understanding cryptocurrencies and then falling deeply in love with the idea of a digital world, one that could be 24/7, one that could be universally accessible. And that's what really led me into discovering cryptocurrencies, as well as then throwing my entire career into it. I really have a level where I have to commit to something wholeheartedly with both feet in order to understand it. Blame my ability to only be a kinetic learner, but I must be doing things in order to understand them. So the best way for me to understand how we were going to be accessing crypto was to build a platform like Binance US and make it available for more Americans every day.
Wow, that's fantastic, and I have to tell you, I envy you on that because in my personal career, it was all about, as an engineer, I was very risk averse. It was all about kind of finding the safest path and very comfortable life and a lot of security that comes with that. So I
wish for that one day.
Well, I actually I regret actually not having taken the same risks early on in my life to get basically to where you are, to a position where you get to be a real contributor to the space. Because for me, I found it to be something super exciting, and I wish I had had the foresight. But that's why I'm excited to have you on, because I think you represent this generation that is not encumbered by these fears and this kind of mold that people think there's a pattern that you have to follow. So
it's scary, and there are fears and molds and things. I just think it requires a little bit of bucking that trend. I certainly grew up with the expectation that I'd be in a career for 30 years. I thought I'd be in Hong Kong for 15 years. I kind of, when I commit to things, you definitely don't anticipate the world changing as quickly as it has. But that's been one of the brilliant things, is the ability to pivot where the world needs you to be kind of a soldier going forward and figuring out what's the unknown.
Yeah, and I think Hong Kong in particular and FX markets seem to be just a really special nexus of two trends, I think, that are important for crypto. First is it's very much active in Asia. And then secondly, the idea of cryptocurrencies as something that could ultimately elevate itself to a supranational currency or something that's tradable along with every other currency. Can you tell us a little bit about how your experience lends itself to where you think, well, first of all, what cryptos are right now in their maturity cycle, but where they might go in terms of full-blown currencies?
Yeah, I was absolutely fascinated by the Asian financial crisis, which created the birth of NDFs as we know it, so non-deliverable forwards. And that, to me, was such an unusual way where the government came in to prevent investors from basically sinking currencies from specific countries. So they would have these rules around the ways to which speculators were able to be involved in these currencies. And one of my roles at Morgan Stanley was to worry about the onshore FX settlement, which seems like a very dull job. And I'll admit it, my first 2 years as an analyst were no one needs to make those sound glamorous. They're absolutely the runt work of understanding the ins and outs of the bank as well as the clients there. So I thoroughly enjoy my experience overall at Morgan Morgan Stanley, but there was a great component of this cash settlement. So the idea that a long short equity hedge fund would be buying Kospi. And the only way for them to get involved in Korean equities was to actually hold the underlying Korean won, which was only available traded onshore during the onshore market hours with onshore brokers. And this was the case for, call it 12 to 15 of those Asian countries that make up these specific onshore markets that don't trade publicly for the average everyday individual, but really are the determining factor for some of these other macro effects on the markets. So the idiosyncratic nature of Asian countries and their currencies was what was fascinating to me, because each one of them had their own a flavor, call it. You had omnibus accounts, or you had specific individual accounts. You had different styles to which you could execute. You had different market hours. You had a lunch break for some of them. And there was all of these nuances that you had to understand about these specific currencies, about how they traded, about that nuance of the culture behind the countries that really gave me this foundation of saying, there is more to this world than just euros or dollars. That was a wonderful world where my New York counterparts were trading in huge size and, tackling massive deals. But in Asia, we had this idiosyncratic understanding of each of the countries, each of their currencies, and really the plaguing of the problems that they had onshore. So if you missed the cutoff on the Kospi by a minute, you weren't able to buy that underlying currency and you weren't able to get into that equity position. They were so strict, they were so regimented. And that was something that I really carried with me into the cryptocurrency understanding for differentiating why we need other aspects or other blockchains outside of Bitcoin. So it was a combination of knowing how difficult it was in Asia to transact local currency to local currency, as well as understanding that there are so many differences inside of the currency markets, especially in Asia, that I was able to carry with me into crypto understanding. So I credit a huge amount of my development in the cryptocurrency market to my familiarity of the Asian cultures, as well as the ability to understand who those investors were around the world that were fascinated by these differences. And then I give a lot of credit. Many of my colleagues are actually in the crypto space. So we have a good amount of Morgan Stanley FX from Hong Kong now in crypto.
Oh, you hit on so many parallels that I've seen in the space in terms of if you want to understand a particular cryptocurrency, you have to understand its community. And the only real difference is that that community culture that kind of exists at a supranational level now. So they could be anywhere in the world, but they do represent a community and they do have their own nuances. And each project is very specific, and there's details around it that are so important to understand if you're going to take a position on them. So I appreciate you telling us that. I didn't realize how complicated on a geographical level it was, and how many nuances you had to consider. But it makes sense.
Hey, if you like this clip, be sure to like and subscribe for more crypto-related content. Also, be sure to check out the full interview and more only on realvision.com/crypto.